Imagine lying in bed tonight, closing your eyes, and then realizing something terrifying. You cannot sleep. 1 hour passes, then 5, then an entire night. You tell yourself you'll be fine. But what if one night became 2? What if 2 became 3? And what if you kept going? For an entire week. Your brain needs sleep. Your body needs sleep. Your memories need sleep. Even your perception of reality depends partly on it. But in 1963, a 17-year-old American teenager decided to ask a question that sounds almost impossible today. How long can a human being stay awake? His name was Randy Gardner. And what happened over the next 11 days became one of the strangest sleep experiments ever conducted. Gardner didn't simply stay awake for 1 night. Or 2. He stayed awake for approximately 264 hours. 11 days. And when it was finally over, researchers were waiting to see what sleep would do to his brain. But the real mystery isn't simply how long Randy stayed awake. It's this: what happens inside a human brain when sleep disappears. Randy Gardner was 17 years old and living in San Diego, California. This wasn't a secret laboratory experiment. It began as a teenager's attempt to break a sleep deprivation record for a science project. Gardner wanted to see how long he could remain awake. And there was already a record to beat. So he began the attempt in December 1963. As the hours passed, friends helped keep him occupied. There was conversation, games, music, activity, and eventually, scientists became interested. Among them was William C. Dement, a Stanford sleep researcher who traveled to San Diego. A U.S. Navy physician, Lieutenant Commander John J. Ross, also helped monitor Gardner. This changed the experiment. Randy was no longer simply a teenager trying to stay awake. He was now being observed by people who wanted to understand what prolonged wakefulness did to the human brain. And the clock kept moving. 24 hours, 4 days, 5 days, 6. The experiment was becoming something much stranger. Because the question was no longer, can he stay awake? It was, what is happening to him? The first day without sleep can feel deceptively manageable. You are tired. Your eyes burn. Your concentration starts slipping. But you can still talk, walk, work, and convince yourself that everything is under control. But inside the brain, things are already changing. Sleep deprivation affects attention, reaction time, working memory, and decision-making. One of the most dangerous effects is something called a microsleep. For a few seconds, the brain can partially enter sleep even though the person appears to be awake. Imagine driving a car and losing conscious awareness for several seconds. That's why sleep deprivation isn't simply about feeling tired. It's about losing reliable control over the brain. Modern research shows that even relatively short sleep loss can impair attention and cognitive performance. Randy, however, was nowhere near finished. The first day was only the beginning. After 2 days without sleep, the experience becomes much more disturbing. Your perception begins to change. Your attention becomes unstable. Your emotions become harder to control. And for some people, perceptual distortions and hallucinations can begin. A scientific review examining prolonged sleep deprivation found that perceptual changes could begin within roughly the first 1 to 2 days, with more complex hallucinations appearing as wakefulness continued. This is where the brain's relationship with reality becomes fascinating. Because your eyes aren't the only thing creating your experience of the world. Your brain is constantly interpreting information. It predicts, it fills gaps, it filters noise. And when the brain becomes severely sleep-deprived, that system starts becoming less reliable. A shadow can look like a person. A sound can seem real when it isn't. Time itself can feel strange. And suddenly, the world you're experiencing may no longer perfectly match the world around you. Gardner was entering territory that very few humans had deliberately explored. 3 days, 72 hours. For most people, this is no longer ordinary tiredness. It is severe sleep deprivation. Research suggests that after several days awake, hallucinations and disordered thinking can become increasingly complex. Speech can become less controlled. Walking can become less steady. Attention can collapse. Emotions can swing unpredictably. And the brain becomes increasingly vulnerable to something called cognitive instability. You might know what you're supposed to do, but your brain struggles to maintain the attention required to do it. Think about trying to solve a simple problem, while someone repeatedly switches the lights on and off inside your mind. That's the problem with extreme sleep deprivation. The brain isn't simply running out of energy. Its ability to coordinate information is becoming unstable. And Randy still had days to go. Here's where Randy Gardner's story becomes especially fascinating. Because photographs and later accounts don't show someone who simply collapsed into a helpless state. Gardner could still interact with people. He could play games. He could talk. And during the final days, William Dement helped keep him occupied with activities including basketball and trips to an arcade. Gardner reportedly performed surprisingly well at pinball. This created an important scientific question. If sleep deprivation was so damaging, how could Gardner still function? The answer is that human performance isn't an on-off switch. A severely sleep-deprived person may still be capable of performing some tasks. That doesn't mean the brain is functioning normally. Modern research shows that sleep deprivation can produce frequent lapses in attention and impair working memory, executive functions, and emotional regulation. So Gardner's ability to play a game didn't mean his brain was untouched. It meant something more complicated. The human brain can remain surprisingly functional even while operating under extreme stress. By the 10th day, Randy Gardner had been awake for more than 200 hours. Imagine that. More than 8 full days. Without normal sleep. At this point, the experiment wasn't really about breaking a record anymore. It had become an experiment in the limits of human wakefulness. The people around Gardner watched his behavior closely. Because sleep deprivation doesn't affect every mental function equally. You might be able to speak normally, while your short-term memory is failing. You might understand a question, but struggle to hold the information needed to answer it. You might walk across a room, but have difficulty making a complicated decision. This uneven breakdown is one reason sleep deprivation is so dangerous. You may not realize how impaired you are. That's the frightening part. The brain responsible for judging your performance is the same brain being affected by the lack of sleep. Then came January 8th, 1964. Around 2 in the morning, Randy Gardner reached the target. 264 hours. 11 days. He had broken the record. At that point, the experiment had reached its end. But nobody was interested in celebrating for long. Researchers wanted to see what happened next. Gardner was taken to a naval hospital. Electrodes were attached to monitor his brain activity. And finally, he was allowed to sleep. After 11 days awake, the brain was finally given what it had been demanding. Sleep. According to Gardner's later recollection, he slept for a little over 14 hours during the first recovery period. And this raises another fascinating question. Would 11 days without sleep permanently damage him? Surprisingly, Gardner's immediate recovery appeared much less dramatic than you might expect. He woke up after his long sleep. He described feeling groggy, but not dramatically worse than after an ordinary night. Later observations suggested that he returned toward his normal functioning. This became one of the most interesting parts of the case, because Gardner's experience did not produce the simple conclusion. 11 days without sleep destroys the brain. Science rarely works that way. One person's experience cannot tell us exactly what will happen to everyone. And Gardner's experiment happened under very unusual conditions. He was young, he was closely observed, and researchers were actively keeping him engaged. We also can't know how much brief involuntary sleep or microsleep may have occurred during such an extreme period. That's one reason modern scientists don't treat the Gardner experiment as a safe experiment that anyone should reproduce. So why does sleep matter so much? Because sleep isn't simply the brain switching off. It's more like changing operating modes. During sleep, the brain cycles through different stages. Memories are processed. Learning is supported. Emotional information is reorganized. And the brain's networks change their activity. When you remove that process, the consequences appear across multiple systems. Attention becomes weaker. Working memory becomes less reliable. Emotional regulation suffers. Reaction time slows. And perception can become distorted. Modern neuroscience research has repeatedly linked sleep loss to changes in attention, working memory, emotion, and learning. So the most important lesson from Randy Gardner isn't humans can survive without sleep. It's almost the opposite. His experiment showed us just how hard the brain works to keep us functioning when one of its most fundamental biological needs is being denied. There is a dangerous myth hidden inside stories like Randy Gardner's. The myth that if one person survived extreme sleep deprivation, maybe sleep isn't that important. But that conclusion doesn't follow. Gardner's case was exceptional. Modern research clearly shows that insufficient sleep can impair attention, judgment, memory, and emotional regulation, while severe sleep deprivation can produce hallucinations and symptoms resembling psychosis. And that's why Guinness World Records eventually stopped recognizing attempts to break the human sleep deprivation record. The goal of science isn't to discover how far we can push the human body, simply because we can. Sometimes the most important discovery is understanding where the limit is before someone gets hurt. Randy Gardner wanted to know how long a human could stay awake. He found an answer: 11 days. But his experiment left us with a much bigger question. Why does the brain need sleep so badly? We still don't have every answer, but we know enough to understand something important. Sleep isn't wasted time. It isn't weakness. It isn't something your brain does when there's nothing better to do. Sleep is part of the system that allows your brain to remember, think, regulate emotion, and perceive reality. Randy Gardner spent 264 hours trying to defeat sleep. And after the experiment, the most powerful thing his brain could do was finally surrender to it. Because sometimes the most mysterious thing about the human brain isn't what happens when we push it to the limit. It's how much work it was doing all along.